Do you know where to go to look for COVID-19 exposure sites in Victoria? And do you know how to track where you've been using your QR code? Now, last week, I had a bit of a scare when I saw that my GP was a Tier 1 exposure site. And so that's another question. Do you understand what a Tier 1 exposure site is or a Tier 2 exposure site is, and what you're required to do if you've been to either a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 exposure site? Now, I'm not coming on to give you any kind of formal advice. I just wanted to share what I did, the steps that I took to help me to work out whether I had been to these places at the times where the COVID exposure was there. So when it came to my GP, so I went through a bit of trial and error with trying to work this out. And the first time I didn't get it right. So because I couldn't remember the exact date, because I'd been into my GP to pick up scripts and referrals, and I'd use my QR code each time, but I hadn't necessarily been in for an appointment, because most appointments with GPs these days are telehealth appointments. So I was kind of banking. It happened over the weekend, so I thought, is there a bit of a wait time with the tracing people who to send you through a message to let you know that you need to go and get tested and isolate? You know, how does this all work? I was just really dealing with it for the first time, of having a concern that I had been to a known exposure site. So I just erred on the side of caution that first time. I did have some symptoms. They were very mild symptoms. I had a headache. I had a bit of congestion. So I just went and got myself COVID tested, and the test result came back negative. On Monday, I followed up with the tracing line and asked them what I was required to do. So that's a really sort of, you know, long process, and it doesn't give you really clear answers. So again, I live in regional Victoria, and I suspected that we would go back into another snap lockdown, because cases were starting to pop up around Geelong area, and which they have today. We've gone into a 7-day snap lockdown. We're back to the same restrictions as metropolitan Melbourne, and except we don't have a curfew. So I just wanted to run through, because now I'm keeping a close eye, because I've seen that there has been a COVID, you know, like there's COVID exposure sites in my local community. So really like only a suburb away from where I live. And I frequent these places because the exposure sites have been places like pharmacy and supermarkets, 2 supermarkets, petrol station. These are all places where people are required to go for everyday things. So plus my GP, which was a big one. So anyway, so I just wanted to share with you what I found is that on the Vic coronavirus site, which is coronavirus.vic.gov.au, you can find on there case alerts. So if you do /case then -alert, then you will be brought to the page where you can actually check the exposure site table. They have a map and they also have a table. So you can click on the table, which I'm just going to, this is what the page looks like. I'll just bring it up. That's what the page looks like. And if you scroll down the page, there is on there, sorry about the glare, exposure site table. So you just click on exposure site table, and then it'll give you an option to type in your suburb and also any dates. So you don't need to pop in a date if you can't remember, because that was the case for me. I knew that I had been to the doctors around that date, but I couldn't remember the exact date because I hadn't gone in there for telehealth appointments, so I hadn't diarised them. And at that time, I didn't know how to check on the QR code site, which I'll show you the next thing after we do this. So what I did simply is that when you click on any suburb, it'll come up with a list, an alphabetical list of suburbs. You just scroll down to the suburb that you're concerned about, that you have been to, and you tap on that suburb, and which I'll do as an example. Just a suburb, you press on the search after you've typed in the name of the suburb, and it will come up with with a list of different places, sites and dates and times where the exposure was and when it was actually listed as a tier 1 or a tier 2 site, and it specifies whether it's tier 1 or tier 2. And you'll also find instructions on this site about what a tier 1, tier 2 or tier 3 exposure site is, and what you're required to do if you've been to any of those exposure sites. So it's really, really good information, but it's just a matter of knowing how to find it. So once you know how to find it, you can revisit that anytime. And as I said, I'm going back to this now pretty much on a daily basis just to check to see, are there any more exposure sites that have come up in my area? And from one day to the next, there have been other exposure sites added. So it's a really good way to stay on top of it and know whether or not, you could possibly have to go and get tested or isolate or be required to do something if you've been to one of those sites, rather than just waiting for a message to come up from contact tracing people. So next I'll just go to the QR code. And just please appreciate that I'm sort of like not a very techie person, okay? So this is coming from somebody who's not techie, but for other people who aren't techie and might be in the same boat that I was and not quite sure how to navigate this, I've just thought I could quickly do a video and run through it. So I'm just going now to the Service Vic app, which is my QR code app, which I would normally use to check in. Now, if you can see, there's a little icon right down the bottom next to the blue check-in. If you tap on that icon, it's like magic. I absolutely love it. Up comes every place that I have visited and the times that I've visited those places and the dates that I've visited those places as well. So this way, if you're unsure, which I was yesterday, there was a Coles supermarket that had come up as being a tier 2 exposure site, which is a supermarket that I go to frequently, and I wasn't sure if I had been there on that day, and I was able to just quickly check on the QR code site, the Vic QR code site, and just by tapping that tiny little icon down near the bottom, it shows you a record of everywhere you've been and the dates. So I hope this helps, and yeah, stay well and stay safe.